Hello and welcome back to Misfit Media. I'm your host Delta and my pronouns are vis. And in this episode I will be talking about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. I'm basically going to do the same thing that I did for The Next Generation, where we'll just talk about things that I, as a queer and disabled person, loved about Deep Space Nine. The first person I absolutely love is Odo. Odo is a shapeshifter, and his natural state is literally just a gelatinous form. Otherwise, he takes the form of like a humanoid man. But technically, because Odo is a shapeshifter, he does not have a gender. So Odo is kind of inherently genderless and therefore else gender, which is very cool. And Odo also gives me such Arrow spec vibes because in the earlier seasons he talks about how he's not interested in mating and how he doesn't understand love and all that stuff, so that gives me agender and Arrow vibes. Another very wholesome thing about Odo that I enjoyed was that he did not have a good childhood because he was experimented on and treated like he wasn't really alive and treated like almost a circus animal, having to perform shape-shifting for the entertainment of other people. And at one point he finds another shapeshifter baby, essentially, and it's very, very wholesome to see how he tries to raise this baby in a better way than he was raised. Then in the first season, I think, there's a scientist on the station for one episode. Her name is Melora and she's disabled because she's originally from a planet where there's very low gravity, and being in a normal gravity environment is very straining for her bones, so she's mostly in a wheelchair when she's not on her home planet, and sometimes she walks, and it's good to see representation of wheelchair users as well, and it's not treated like she's faking it or anything. And in that episode, the doctor on the station, Julian Bashir, actually tries finding a cure for her condition to make her bones and her muscles more strong, but that would mean that she could never go to her home planet again, and she chooses to stay disabled and to be able to go to her home planet. So this is another great instance of a disabled person choosing disability over a cure. Then in one of the earlier seasons there's a Ferengi woman coming on the ship, but because the Ferengi are very, very backwards on women's rights, she has to dress up as a man and pretend to be a man, and she falls in love with a male Ferengi on the station, Quark. Everyone thinks she's a man, and one of the other characters realizes that she is in love with Quark, so thinks that this Ferengi man, quote unquote, is gay for Quark. And it's just treated as a normal thing. Like, it's not treated as weird that this Ferengi would be gay, even though she's not gay because she's a woman, but the possibility is very much treated as normal. Another queer thing is that throughout the show, every now and then they talk about a pregnant male character, and it's just treated as a normal thing. We never see this character because I think he's kind of a weird species and they didn't know how to do it, but it's mentioned at least twice in the show, and it's just treated as a normal thing that a man can be the one giving birth. Let's get into the doctor, Julian Bashir. I think he's very, very much autistic. It's so obvious that he doesn't entirely understand social cues and expresses things in a way that people take differently than he meant it. I can relate. Spoiler for Julian Bashir, so maybe skip a bit if you don't want to hear this. Julian Bashir is actually genetically engineered. His parents took him to hospital to have him genetically engineered because as a child his development was slower than his peers, and his parents did not like that. So that makes me think that he was already autistic in kind of a different way as a child, and his parents tried to make him not autistic, and it didn't work because he still seems so autistic as an adult. And he actually meets with other people who have been genetically engineered, and they all seem very neurodivergent. I don't know if this is necessarily good representation, but they get into the whole thing of how neurodivergent people can relate more to other neurodivergent people. He talks about how they're all on the same wavelength and stuff, and it's very interesting to see. So let's get into the Trill, because there's a lot of queer stuff about the Trill. I already talked about one Trill character in The Next Generation, but if you don't remember, the Trill are an alien species, and lots of them have a Trill symbiont implanted into them, and their consciousnesses are kind of melting together almost. So the main Trill character in this show is Jadzia Dax. Jadzia being the host and Dax being the symbiont. And the Dax symbiont has lived 8 lifetimes before Jadzia, and she has all the memories of all the people. So she has memories and experiences of living as various men, but especially the one right before her, Curzon Dax. And that's so queer, because it's very trans, it's very gender fluid, it's very multi-gender. Like, there are characters who knew Curzon Dax, the one before, and they still call Jadzia Dax old man, and she doesn't care, because manhood is pretty much a part of her by virtue of having his memories and experiences and all that stuff. It feels like the symbionts are either all genderless or gender fluid, and the joined Trill, if they have memories of multiple genders, they are all multigender, because that's just how everyone's acting. And Jadzia also has one of the first lesbian kisses on TV, because there's another Trill on the station who is a woman, and the symbionts, when they were and other people way before, they've been married, but Dax was inside of a man, so they were like a man and a woman being married, and now they are 2 women, and they are still in love, so they kiss. But as usual, they did find a way that they can't be together. As Trill, apparently you're not meant to have relationships with people from your past lives. But Jadzia does not seem to care about gender when she falls in love, so she's some kind of M-spec and possibly pan. The Trill also kind of give me plural vibes. They always talk about how they only have their memories, and I'm not sure if that on its own would count as plurality, but just the behavior and just how important all the past lives are. It seems like all the people are still living in her head, like Jadzia's head. They are still there. Major spoiler coming up now for Jadzia. If you haven't watched the show and you don't want to be spoiled, skip until the end of the episode, because the rest will be spoilery. At the end of season 6, Jadzia dies and Dax is transplanted to another Trill, and that other Trill, Esri, has not been trained, because they have to do some kind of training to be prepared to be joined with a symbiont. But she has not had that training, so that's kind of where the plural vibes come up even more, because all of her other past lives come through a lot with her. Like, for example, she will order a drink because Jadzia liked that drink, and Jadzia came out. So she had like impulses that Jadzia wanted to do something, or any other of her past lives wanted to do something, and then she did it. And another thing with Esri that's very interesting is that as Jadzia, Dax was married to Wolf, another character, and obviously Esri isn't supposed to be with Wolf because he's from a past life, but also Wolf has a lot of trouble at the start to accept that the symbiont he was married to is now in a different person, and the different person still is kind of Jadzia, but also not. And he gets over it, and they talk about how they're friends, and then Wolf says, we are actually more than friends, but they are not really romantically in love with each other. It gives me queer platonic vibes. I mean, the whole more than friends thing is kind of problematic because it puts partnerships or other relationships above friendships, but it just kind of gave me like queer platonic vibes, so that's cool. And yeah, that's all the very cool things about Deep Space Nine I can talk about in this episode. I loved Deep Space Nine, especially season 7 was really, really good. And yeah, if you enjoyed this episode, please consider giving it a 5-star review anywhere that's possible. For everything else, like the podcast transcripts, the Misfit Media Discord, my social media, my email, sending me an anonymous question, or sending me a voice message, all the information will be in the link tree of the description of this episode. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, stay safe.